does anybody care? This planet's empty, I see no signs of life. Please don't tell me that the human race did not survive. There are no people in the future. There are no people. There are no people in the future. No people at all. There are no people in the future. Where did all my people go? There are no people in the future. Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Hey, everybody. Welcome. Yes, my mic. Yes, welcome. It is Friday, February. What am I talking about? March 29th, 2024. Welcome to Raging Chicken's Friday Politics Roundup. This is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. Each week we break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. You can support this show by becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/rcpress for all the details. You can help out the show by heading over to our YouTube channel if you're not there already. Smash that subscribe button, like the stream for this show, and hit that notification bell so you know every time that we go live. And if you're one of our awesome podcast listeners, make sure to leave us a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen on. Leave a comment to let other folks know why you like the show. Little things like this help other people find the show. On today's program, a lot going on in the news this week, that's for sure. The biggest one that is all over the headlines all throughout the week, a container ship, of course, hit the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, causing the bridge to collapse and 6 workers to lose their lives. This is going to be, there's a lot of interesting stuff going around that in terms of how this problem or how this accident is being interpreted. We'll get into that. And after John Fetterman stakes out a hawkish support of Israel and distances himself from progressives, well, guess what? His staff is checking out. Yep, they're leaving him in droves. And former Senator and Vice Presidential candidate Joe Lieberman died this week. Let that signal the passing of one of the more destructive factions and ideologies in the Democratic Party. NBC hires, then fires Ronna McDaniel, that election-denying former head of the GOP. Yeah, that was an interesting roller coaster this week. And school absences, according to new reports, school absences have exploded and continue in the post-COVID world, causing all sorts of complications and problems within schools and for kids. We're going to talk a little bit about that because there's a lot there. And then there's also the way that this is also being interpreted and some of the assumptions that have been made since COVID that I think are kind of destructive, but we'll get back to that. A lot of higher education news this week, just a flood of it. Just check that this is a sampling. The University of Florida is going after faculty members that they think interfered with the university's new Hamilton Center for Classical and Civic Education. What is that? Well, that's the newly established beachhead for the so-called classical education and the Western canon. Those are the buzzwords, but used by Christian nationalists and far-right activists seeking to whitewash American education and bolster white Christian and celebratory narrative about the U.S., right, and the founders, right? So you've been following what Governor DeSantis has been doing down there in Florida. If you've been seeing what's happening with Moms for Liberty and what happened in our Penridge School District and Central Bucks School District, and now it's happening in the Ole School District, happened in Kutztown School District, and Souderton and Palisades, well, this is the same thing, right? Same thing. And at Boston University, well, they have some graduate students are on strike there. I kind of highlighted this last week. But they are now on strike. And the administration, just trying to be helpful, had some suggestions for faculty members during that current strike about, what to do. They had a great suggestion, just trying to help out. Hey, you know what? All that stuff that the graduate students did? Why don't you just have AI do it instead? Yeah, have AI do it. You don't need those stinking grad students. Have AI do the comments and suggestions and all that kind of stuff. Just have the AI do it. Yep, here we go. For all my friends out there who are like, I think this whole idea about AI replacing workers is a little bit overblown. Well, here you go. And notice that these are workers that are in higher ed, right? These are the workers that not just the higher ed workers, but these are the workers that, again, have been pointed to that AI is targeting, but we'll see. And here's another one. A new Indiana law is going to require professors to promote intellectual diversity or face disciplinary actions. Intellectual diversity. Sounds good. Like, well, what is that? Well, it means entertaining even fascist ideas as just another set of ideas. Was Hitler wrong? Right? Well, how do we assess Hitler? Well, you got to entertain all the ideas. Well, let's look at this argument. Well, let's argue for Hitler and arguments against Hitler. And who are we to decide? These are the same people, ironically, right, who were so against like postmodernism and talk about relativism and all this other kind of stuff. Really, this is nothing but making sure that right-wing agendas, right, and right-wing students that are infected with this agenda don't have their foo-foos hurting when they find out that facts in the world matter. That genocide is not a good thing. Right? Anyways. One more. University of Kentucky's president seeks to disband their faculty senate and turn decision-making over to their board of trustees. Because, all those kind of real estate people and rich folks that are on the board of trustees, they're in a much better decision-making position. And, their expertise in kind of, making money and kind of like shaking hands and stuff like that is much better than, the expertise that faculty bring. What do they bring? Yeah. In other news, Bucks County sues Big Oil for lying about the climate crisis. That's huge. And PA's primary is right around the corner. We'll give you about the dates and the deadlines you need to know. That's just some of the stuff we'll check on today. We'll see what we get through. There's a bunch of stuff that's happening this week. A lot of things going on, but we'll see what we get to today. And for more PA Progressive talk, check out the Rick Smith Show's live stream every night at 9 p.m. And check out his YouTube channel, Twitter, and Facebook. And subscribe to his podcast wherever you get his podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. Go to ricksmithshow.com for the latest across all his platforms. And the Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast is rocking it. The amazing PA women stirring the political cauldron behind this podcast rock the house. And they know where the bodies are buried. Make sure to follow them on Twitter at The Night Caucus. That's at The Night Caucus on Twitter. And subscribe to their podcast at Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcast. And The Signal is a podcast for the Bucks County Beacon. The Signal is hosted by Beacon's editor-in-chief, Cyril Michaleko, and produced by yours truly. Twice a month, The Signal will shine a light on the right-wing extremist currents streaming through Bucks County and beyond. Cyril invites guests who can provide insight, analysis, and organizing solutions so that we can steer the community toward calmer, saner, progressive roots. Check out that podcast at buckscountybeacon.podbean.com. And The Civic Circle is also a podcast for the Bucks County Beacon that tackles politics and policy from a Gen Z lens. Sarah Zhang, Mallory Marson, and Alexandra Coffey are students from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and once a month they chat about activism, advocacy, and all the political happenings affecting their generation today. Check them out at The Civic Circle or just civiccircle.podbean.com. For all you gamers out there, The Game In, that's with two N's, The Game In is a Quakertown-based black family-owned gaming store. They're friends of the show, and they got everything from retro N64s, the latest consoles, video games for all platforms, collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops, walls of Funko Pops. Yeah, kids get discounts when they get good grades, so check them out. Got a question about a game, looking for something hard to get, they've got you covered. Check them out at their Facebook page or follow them on Twitter at TheGameIn, that's with two N's. Shoot a message or drop them an email at thegameinpa@gmail.com. And if you find yourself in the Kutztown area, you've got to check out the Heart and Hearth Deli and Smokehouse, located at 466 West Main Street. That's kitty corner from the Kutztown University campus. Heart and Hearth is an American bistro featuring barbecue and French-inspired fare, all with locally sourced and organic ingredients. And Colleen and Jim are freaking awesome. Colleen's a good friend of mine. She runs the place. She's an amazing cook and just an awesome person. So go do check that out. That's 466 West Main Street in Kutztown. And a shout out goes to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. And check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page and follow him on Twitter at SongADayMan, two N's, at SongADayMan on Twitter. So look, everybody, we want a progressive future. We need progressive media. Support Pull No Punches, homegrown progressive media today. Become a patron of Raging Chicken for as little as $5 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/rcpress for all the details. We're here for the fight, but we need you. Become a patron for the price of a good beer once a month. Help keep the media in the movement the media. Become a patron for as little as $5 a month by going to patreon.com/rcpress today. Well, everybody, hope you're doing well today. I have some nasty little allergies going on for me today, so it is what it is. I mean, it's that time of year. I got to say, I'm very much looking forward to getting my hands in the garden and start the next season. Oh, man, I'm tired. I'm exhausted. What I'm going to be... it's one of these things. It's one of these one of these years at my job, right, where at Kutztown, where it's it's just beat me down this time. It just beat me down. You've heard me talk about, we've got this new registration system for students and things like this, and it's just whatever. It's just it's a time suck. It's yet another time suck. And how this works, right? I mean, how it works at jobs where they sit there and say, oh, you just try, it's just one more thing, or just this one more training, or you just got to do this one more thing, or, you don't know how to do that. Oh, check out these 10 videos, right? And, it's like, all that stuff, even if you were to kind of look at this as all just well-intentioned, right? So, oh yeah, we're just trying to kind of help. It's like, it's all thrust back, down on the people who actually have to do the work, right? In this case, us faculty members and things like this and staff members. And then, so you're sitting there, you find out that your just time goes out the window and you're wondering, how the hell did I get behind in this other stuff, right? I've been working my brains off and blah, 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 but that's the way it's been. It's been just really, really frustrating and annoying and all that kind of fun stuff, but. So anyways, yeah, I mean, this what happened in Baltimore this week was just like unbelievable. I mean, it devastating. Workers lost their lives. I mean, it's remarkable that more people did not lose their lives. I mean, combination of luck, quick response, and the fact that it was in the middle of the night, that's about it, right? I mean, that didn't help the workers who were actually working repairing potholes on the bridge, right, in the middle of the night. I mean, they lost their lives. I have been, look, I mean, it's a devastating accident. I mean, what are you going to do, right? And I mean, it's not the kind of thing, despite whatever kind of, the right wing kind of trolls on, fantasy hackers, whatever you want to call them, it's just watching that crew just try to kind of blame the bridge, or blame this on some kind of Chinese cyber attack or DEI policies, and then they go, all bunch of the racists get up in the on their feeds and start calling him the mayor of Baltimore as a DEI mayor, right? Because he's black, right? I mean, so all the racism comes out. They just kind of show their all hands and all the stuff. Their fantasies come out. They start constructing in real time new conspiracy theories, whatever. But so there's that, right? I mean, that little kind of sideshow that goes on with these people. That's just their normal. They actually believe all this crap and they just want to stir this stuff up. But there's a few things about the way that this is being discussed now that both point to major problems and really kind of systemic issues, and well, let me just put it like this. There was this article in the Independent, right? It's a UK paper or whatever like this. It's a US edition, whatever. So I want to read a couple of things here and just want to talk about the way that this narrative is getting constructed here, right? So the headline is Baltimore Key Bridge collapse, latest news, and then, in quote, structural failure to blame as massive cleanup begins. Right? So that alone as a, if anybody who saw the footage of what happened there, right? I mean, you would be, I think you'd be forgiven if you wondered why, you see the structural failure is to blame in this headline, as opposed to I don't know how many tons was it? This is an enormous cargo ship crashed into a pylon head on. That was the reason. That's to blame, right? The crash into the bridge was to blame, right? It's not as if the bridge just kind of collapsed by itself. So whatever. I just thought that was a little bit of a strange headline, right? So, but then if you look at the article, God, what is going on with my highlights and stuff here? I've got this, program this tool that I use to highlight stuff, highlight articles and things like this that has been just not working of late, and it's really strange. Let me see if I can just pull up this other version of this. So I'm just going to have to go through and re-highlight stuff. Okay, so here you go. Oh no, this is a different one. Shoot. Well, no, they don't have it. So let me just read you this part about what they say in this in the article. So here's the article. Structural failures are to blame for the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, experts have said, as a massive cleanup operation begins. While it is too early to say exactly what happened during the collision and the collapse that resulted, experts have revealed that the Francis Scott Key Bridge, which was designed in the 1970s, might not have been designed with the vast size and power of the ships that sail under it today in mind. Quote, it's conceivable that the piers weren't designed to withstand the magnitude of today's ship's impacts, as vessels like the Dolly weren't navigating the port of Baltimore during the era, said Professor Toby Mottram of the University of Warwick. Right? And then it goes on. So just look at how that's constructed, right? It's conceivable that they failed in the construction of the bridge. Right, that maybe they didn't kind of keep these ships in mind. Let's be clear: the size of these ships did not exist then. Right, it's the size of the ships, right? The massive ships and the way that they are piling these ships, are piling more and more onto these ships, these massive container ships. That's what has changed. Right? So it's not a failure in the design of the bridge, right? It's the fact that the bridge was designed, right, look, you could actually see the way that it was kind of set up. Yes, that was designed to kind of withstand impacts, but the fact is that somebody made decisions along the way to allow larger and larger ships into that port without taking into consideration the kinds of infrastructure upgrades that would be necessary to keep people safe, right? That is a more accurate description of these two things, massive ship and a bridge, right? So in addition to the bigger issues around infrastructure, right, that, the U.S. does not invest in our infrastructure, right, that we just let it rot away because we just deem that anything that has to do with the public good is something that is bad somehow. So we don't invest in infrastructure. We have some of the worst roads in the developed world. We have, crumbling bridges. Pennsylvania has some of the worst bridges in the country, one of the worst roads in the country. But we know that there's report after report, we talk about this on the show too as well, about the failure of the United States government to invest in our infrastructure. It shows the success of the neoliberal, right-wing, free market for all version of the way we should conduct a society. We see the victory of that in the way that we conduct this society. In other words, it's not profitable for a private company to go and fix a bridge and keep it up to date because there's no money in that. The only people that can do that, the only way that we can have that good kind of infrastructure is for the government to invest in it to have it built. And again, once the government does that, whether it's a state government or a federal government, once they do that, guess what happens? All sorts of people profit from it. Right? Lots of workers are hired, right? Companies get contracts to fix stuff and all that kind of thing, right? So there's lots of economic activity that happens once the government invests in that. But we have been conditioned to believe that that is a bad thing for the government to invest in things. Because what does the government mean? What does the government mean? It means our tax dollars. And so we're told that taxes are bad, that the government is reaching in your pocket and blah, 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 blah. So instead of ours as a society, instead of blaming corporations for outsourcing our jobs and therefore kind of declining our life, instead of kind of blaming corporations and kind of right-wing policies and neoliberal Democrats, instead of blaming them for basically saying, because of we shipped all the good jobs away, we've seen an anti-union push, and we've seen flat wages. No, what we're going to say is that, no, it's the government taking our money away. They're the culprits. If anything, this is kind of the neoliberal Democrat and the right-wing politicians, right? All those folks together over the past 50 years have slowly walked us away from the public good and said, we're not going to think about each other. We're not going to see this as a community or a society. Nope. We want you to think only of yourselves as individuals, consumers. That's it. And the government is trying to control you, trying to take from you. That's been the narrative for the past 50 years, 40 years, right? So this is a perfect example, right? This is the kind of thing that you can anticipate, right? And I am sure we are going to see hearings. We are going to hear hearings about this stuff, right? They're going to look into all this kind of safety issues, and we are going to find that somewhere there were people, probably engineers, probably safety experts who are like this, who were pointing to this as a problem. Right? You have a harbor that is designed for smaller ships, and you are forcing that harbor to accept much larger ships. There's going to be consequences of this. It's not brain surgery to figure that stuff out. All you got to do is kind of say, okay, if we do X, what's the consequence? What happens? Let's game that out and let's kind of see, okay, if these are going to be the consequences, do we want to do it, number one? And if we do want to do it, what are the things that we need to do to make sure that safety is kind of upheld? Pretty straightforward. But we're told that those things are not supposed to be good. Safety, sacrifice safety for profit. And in this case, who's profiting? Right? Well, it's the shipping companies. So on the BBC the other night, it wasn't the night of the collision. It wasn't that next day of the collision. I think it was the day after that, I believe. The BBC NewsHour, they were interviewing some guy who's like, logistics specialist, U.S. logistic guy, some kind of corporate dude. But I appreciated the interview, and I appreciated the guy that they interviewed, because he kind of basically put his finger right on the problem, right? He wasn't trying to kind of like be a whistleblower or cause problems. He was just trying to like say, hey, this is how it is. And what he said was that part of the issue is that we're looking at kind of the safety of these ships, because there's a big question, right? So there's the infrastructure we just talked about. Second one is like, what about the safety of the ship? How is it that this massive ship that could do such damage, how is it that it lost power, right? How is it that it kind of failed in such a spectacular way, right? Well, and it's, that raises questions again about safety, what's happening on board, like, was this inspected, all this stuff? And what this guy basically says is, well, look, he said, what we've done over the past, I want to say over the past decade, maybe it's a little bit longer period of time, but I believe you said over the past decade, what we've seen a push in the shipping industry was to minimize the amount of downtime that each ship has and maximize its movement. Right? So in other words, instead of coming into port, going through a thorough inspection, going through making sure that everything is kind of safe each time they come into port, nope, they want just superficial kind of look. If there's any major problems, let's get back out there. Which means, according to this guy, that inspections just kind of aren't paid attention to as much. Or there's really not time to do thorough inspections on a consistent basis. So safety is sacrificed in order, because you think about it, a container ship, like if you have a container ship that stays in port a day, as opposed to 8 hours, right? What's the real major impact, right? Like, so let the containers, instead of being able to be out there 8 days, so you save, like, what's that, 16 hours, right? So really what you're talking about is that whatever is on those container ship gets to their destination 16 hours later if you wait a whole day. And I'm just making up these numbers. I don't know what the normal time was. I'm just thinking about what this guy said. And so it gets there 16 hours later. Is that really that big of a deal? Well, if you're a shipping company and all you're trying to do is maximize profit, right, you're going to squeeze everything. You're going to try to ramp up production, in this case, shipping, right? And you're going to try to suppress wages, right? That's the classic way. There's two ways to increase profit, right? You just kind of produce more and more quickly, right? Or you suppress costs. Usually that means labor costs, right? And you don't do things like, you don't have safety inspections, because safety inspections, if you find something that's wrong, you got to fix it. That costs money. So you want to minimize the expenditure of money and hope for the best that nothing fails, right? So in this case, basically saying that, look, safety was sacrificed to profit. And the guy says, is like, well, look, if you have people sitting in, these massive ships kind of coming into ports and having to go through all these safety inspections every single time, well, then that's going to cost money. And then that gets passed on to consumers. And, our goal, goes, these companies want to kind of, not pass those costs on to consumers and maximize their own gains. And you're like, well, there you go. The guy just said it. The guy just said what's going on, right? And that was like, okay, that's a good analysis, dude. Thank you. You should kind of expose it, right? And then there's a third element, right? The third element, so we've got infrastructure failures in terms of like U.S. long-term lack of investment because of neoliberalism, because of this kind of like, the government is bad thing that's been going on for 40 years. Right? So that's number one. The second thing is the squeezing for profit. So the lack of safety inspections. Right? That's a problem. And then the third one is that we find there's no consequences for bad actors and anti-worker policies. So here's an article. This is an article from the, this is Brett Wilkins from In These Times, originally published in Common Dream, but here. There's a report. This is based largely in a report that came out from Newsweek, right, that did a expose on this. But here's this article, right? So the ship was called the Dolly, right? So the 9-year-old Dolly was also detained by port officials in San Antonio, Chile. Hold on a second. Okay, so the 9-year-old Dolly was also detained by port officials in San Antonio, Chile last June after inspectors discovered a problem related to the vessel's, quote, propulsion and auxiliary machinery, unquote. That's according to the Washington Post, which cited records from the intergovernmental shipping regulator Tokyo MOU. The ship's owner, Grace Ocean Private Limited, and operator, Synergy Marine, quote, have been sued at least 4 times in U.S. federal court on allegations of negligence and other claims tied to worker injuries on other ships owned and operated by the Singapore-based companies, unquote, according to the Associated Press. There's more. Maersk, who is supposedly, like, you can see all the subcontracting already, right? All the subcontracting. So Maersk was also sanctioned last year by the U.S. Labor Department for allegedly stopping employees from reporting safety concerns, documents published by The Lever revealed. According to a July 14, 2023 Labor Department letter to Maersk regarding an Occupational Safety and Health Administration investigation, the Danish company, quote, suspended and then terminated a worker in retaliation for reporting unsafe conditions and contacting the U.S. Coast Guard. The fired employee, quote, engaged in numerous protected activities, unquote, including reporting a leak and the need for repairs to a ship's cargo hold bilge system, alcohol use aboard the vessel by crew members, and inoperable equipment, including an emergency fire pump and lifeboat block releasing gear. There's your third lane. So you have retaliation against workers who report problems, right? And apparently there was some other stories that came out this week. You started hearing these first-person accounts and talking about how this was a consistent thing, and Maersk would do, was discipline workers when they reported problems, right? So there you go. This is not again, that's the one part about that independent headline that is correct. A structural failure is to blame. Yeah, a structural failure, not of the bridge, right? But of our runaway, like, profit at all costs, ramped up free market capitalism. That's what's the deal. That's the structural problem, right? I mean, it's remarkable that, and again, I do believe the narrative is going to get there, right? But it's going to be, obviously, in mainstream news, it's going to get really washed down and all this stuff. But I think that, the additional hearings that come up and we're going to start seeing these pieces. And this is such a window into the costs of the way that we run this society. Straight up. Now, Biden comes out this week, right, and says, by hook or by crook, he basically pulls a Shapiro, right? Instead of like the collapse of the bridge, like an I-95 where, boom, we're going to fix 95. Now we got the Francis Scott Key Bridge, right? Much bigger endeavor, but he says, no, the federal government, we're gonna move heaven and earth, I think is what he said, in order to kind of get this bridge up and running. Either replace the bridge or fix the bridge, right? I don't even know if it can be replaced, or fix the bridge. And that the federal government is going to bear all the costs, right? Again, let's go back to the beginning. Who's the federal government, right? Oh, the federal government isn't out there, it's earning wages for itself and then kind of goes out. No, those are our tax dollars, right? This is the money that the government is kind of going to be spending, right? This is money that could, say, go to something else, right? Now, again, we could push back on all sorts of problems here because, all sorts of kind of assumptions being made. Well, because it's a single pie and blah, blah, blah. No, the federal government can actually do this, could do this other. But the point is that ultimately the public is paying for the systemic breakdowns of this free market capitalist system. Maersk, these other shipping companies, right? They're not going to fix the bridge. They had all the benefits of ramping up the speed of this, of making larger and larger ships, despite the fact that the ports weren't prepared for them, suppressing their workers in order to squeeze more profit. They had all the gains of it. They privatized the profit, right? But they make all the risk something that we bear. You break a bridge, you should fix it. They were the beneficiaries of this free market runaway capitalist system. Well, then guess what? You pay the consequences. But we don't live in a political culture that has the will to do that. It's remarkable, right? You socialize the cost, you privatize the profits. That is the mantra of this period of capitalism. And there's 6 people that paid the ultimate price for this system, this structural failure. And those are those workers who are fixing potholes on that bridge in the middle of the night so it wouldn't disrupt traffic. And I believe all 6 of those workers were immigrants. I'm not quite sure where they kind of settled on all the identities, if they're like all like new immigrants or if some have been around. I know a few of them had been kind of working on this stuff for like a decade or something. So now we also have a political culture which demonizes immigrants, which also contributes to the loss of their lives. It's remarkable. It was devastating. I've gone across that bridge countless times. I used to live in, Washington, D.C., right? And my folks live in New York, like upstate New York. And, I have friends in New York City and, all the places. And I've been over that so many times. It's remarkable. Well, in other news, Fetterman is kind of losing his staff because, he gets elected, pretends to be a big progressive, right? Will Bunch has been calling this out right down the line, basically saying, when are liberals going to stop supporting this guy? Well, I guess now is the time. Because there's been some serious turnover in his office, right? In the last month, all 3 of Fetterman's top communication staffers have left the Capitol. Have left Capitol Hill. This is according to a report in the Philadelphia Inquirer by Julia Taruso. Nick Gavio, who is the Deputy Communications Director, will leave the office at the end of March to take on a new role with the Working Families Party. Fetterman's former Communication Director, Joe Calvello, left earlier this month to work for Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson. And Emma Mustian, the press and digital aide, also left Fetterman's office to work on a re-election campaign for Senator Casey. And I'll just read this from the article. Quote, say Gavio and Calvello, 2 veterans of Bernie Sanders' 2020 campaign and Fetterman's Senate campaign, offered nothing but nice comments about their new job. But Clout, this is that article, or this is that column, Clout doesn't believe in coincidence, and it seems relevant that both are going to more progressive spaces, given that Fetterman has recently made a big deal of denouncing that ever nebulous political label. So there you go. So Fetterman got elected. Again, this is really frustrating because Fetterman got elected because of progressives who supported him and got out there and did the work, right? But now he's kind of putting on that Washington, D.C. suit and deciding that he's going to play the Joe Manchin lane. He's going for the Joe Manchin lane now. Maybe he'll fill the shoes of the Joe Lieberman lane that has just been recently vacated. So crazy. But yeah, Joe Lieberman died this week. There's a fall, complications, went to the hospital, and he died. I had Joe Lieberman has a particular place in my disdain Hall of Fame. He was the vice presidential candidate and he ran with Al Gore. He was a hawk in the Iraq War. He helped propagate the lies about weapons of mass destruction. He stood fast with President George W. Bush in that kind of devastating conflict. He was a strong proponent of austerity against workers, was no friend to working people. He embraced neoliberal economics and free market economics that kind of caused the destruction of our kind of unionized workforce. I mean, we can go on and on and on with this guy. His biggest donors were big insurance companies. And he became one of the strongest opponents to Medicare for all and any sense of a public option in healthcare. How do you go down the line? This guy is like the Democrat that was worse. And I remember, I remember so much about this. And it's just so whatever. No friend of Joe Lieberman's. I actually met the guy once. I worked in, when I lived in D.C., I worked in Politics and Prose bookstore. Awesome place. And he had a book that came out, which I don't remember what it was. And I was, working when he came, he came to the bookstore as part of his book tour, right? And so he comes in and part of my job that night was to kind of making sure that the book signing area was set up and all that other kind of stuff. And so I went over, he sat down, he was kind of getting ready for it. And I bring over a big stack of books and, put it out there and said, shook his hand, kind of thing. And yeah, just remember that. I remember him having this big, soft, meaty paw. That's what I remember about him. But whatever. So I just, I hope, I don't like to, wish poor the dead for the most part, but I do hope that this marks a certain kind of turning point in that kind of politics at least within the Democratic Party. We shall see. I don't know if you followed this too this week. You had the big kind of blow up and MSNBC and NBC because they hired Ronna McDaniel, right? NBC News hired Ronna McDaniel, who was the former head of the GOP, who was just ousted so they could bring in Trump's people. She was at the forefront of some of the election denial stuff. And then for some reason, NBC decided, hey, this would be like a great person to bring on, right? Because both sides, there was a revolt at the organization, first with MSNBC, about how can you have election denial who was encourage attacks on the press? You're going to bring this person into this. How can you do that? And then MSNBC finally kind of backed off, said, okay, nope, she's not going to be on our network. But NBC still had her. And then there was further revolts among staff and on-air talent and journalists about Ronna McDaniel over the same things, and then she was eventually fired. So, all within 1 week. How about that? That was fun. Here's another thing that I wanted to talk about that was just about a little bit about the narrative that is being constructed here, like around a really, really real thing, right? So there's this article that came out in the New York Times, I think today. It was today. About school absences. And it's funny this comes out now. I've had multiple conversations just this week with faculty at Kutztown University, in our house here, and with some neighbors about this issue. And I said literally yesterday, I was talking to one of my colleagues, and I said to him that, I said, yeah, it's just, it seems to me a particular issue with some students this year that is different than before. And it's really hard, for me at least, what I was saying, it's hard to put my finger on it. And then I started thinking about it. It's like, this right now, 4 years ago, right? So 4 years ago this month, right? I mean, it was March 13th, 2020, when everything shut down because of COVID, right? And so 4 years basically to the day, or to the month at least, was when when COVID first ramped up. So that means the students, first year students in particular, who are entering college today, had a good chunk of their time in high school was dominated by COVID. Either having to do things online or hybrid, or having to kind of adjust the way that classes work because of this. The shift to making sure that all materials were online and accessible. So if somebody got COVID, they'd be able to access it, or if they were like from a vulnerable, say population, like people that, would, their life could be at risk if they contracted COVID, especially during those first couple of years. All that happened. So that was the largest part of their high school career, is the students that are kind of entering now, are coming to campus now. And so, and it pushes down, right? So the same thing is true, that students who were finishing grade school, right, when COVID began, are just starting high school, right? It's like my son, right? Students who were in elementary school are in middle school. It's my daughter, right? So I mean, you see all, so this kind of cohort is working its way through the educational system, and what they're finding is that there's really significant absences. And this report in the New York Times is really focusing on K through 12 school, right? Now here's a statistic, but I want to talk about a little bit about this here. So nationally, an estimated 26% of public school students were considered chronically absent from school last year, up from 15% before the pandemic, according to the most recent data from 40 states and Washington, D.C., compiled by the conservative-leaning American Enterprise Institute. Chronic absence is typically defined as missing at least 10% of the school year, or about 18 days. So I find it really interesting that the American Enterprise Institute, this is a right-wing, full-on free market think tank in Washington, D.C., right? They are the ones interested in this question, right? So I just, put that aside, right? That doesn't mean that the data is being compiled, right? So it doesn't mean there's a problem, but it's in the back of my head to say, okay, what's the interest, right? You are a think tank that's promoting free market principles and right-wing policies, libertarian type policies. Why are you invested in this as an institution? Just a question mark, right? And they find some, really different things. So for example, the absenteeism now, right, is worse among the poorest students, right? It's always been worse among the poorest students, but it went from 19% absent to 32%, right? In the richest districts, it went from 10% to 19%. And the overall average is from 15% to 26%. So 26% of students have this, quote unquote, what they're calling chronic absenteeism. In the statistics too, as well, that they offer here, the students that went to the most in-person schools went from 16% to 25%. Students who were in the most remote schools, right, went from 16% to 28%. So a slight difference there. Right, but overall, the statistics are from 15% to 25%. If you do look at the middle, right? So there's that. Larger the school district, the more their absenteeism. When you look at racial disparities, non-white went from 17% to 30%. White went from 13% to 22%. So both went up significantly, but there's a disparity in terms of there. Again, the disparity was there at the beginning, but the disparity has increased toward the end. So you have a disproportionate impact on people of color, right? Here's the description of it in the Times. The increases have occurred in districts big and small and across income and race. For districts in wealthier areas, chronic absenteeism rates went double to 19% in the 2022-23 school year from 10% before the pandemic. A New York Times analysis of data found. So this is New York Times kind of confirming this. Poor communities, which started with elevated rates of student absenteeism, are facing an even bigger crisis. Around 32% of students in the poorest districts were chronically absent in the 2022-23 school year, up from 19% before the pandemic, right? So just those statistics that I'm laying out there. So that's happening, right? I could say this is also happening at the college level. It's not what this report is interested in, but the college level too as well. There's been, again, this is anecdotal, right? This is not, but there's multiple people, right, in different disciplines, right, at my university, like at different disciplines, different size classes, all this other kind of stuff, right? So it's not like just in like the English department or just in the art school or something like that. Nope, across the university, different faculty noticing they're finding about a 25% drop off of attendance. Like just suddenly students stop showing up. And you contact them, it's just, and then not handing in work, right? Not following things. I mean, so there's a whole bunch of stuff that's kind of going on there, right? So there's definitely something that have an impact. So here's, they start looking at some of the suggestions. Or some of the like potential reasons. So here's an interesting passage, right? So the trends suggest that something fundamental has shifted in American childhood and the culture of school in ways that may be long lasting. What was once a deeply ingrained habit, wake up, catch the bus, report to class, is now something far more tenuous. Quote, our relationship with school became optional, unquote, said Katie Rosenbaum, a psychologist and associate research professor with the Center for Child and Family Policy at Duke University. The habit of daily attendance and many families' trust was severed when schools shut down in 2020. Even after schools reopened, things hardly snapped back to normal. Districts offered remote options, required COVID-19 quarantines, and relaxed policies around attendance and grading. Today, student absenteeism is a leading factor hindering the nation's recovery from pandemic learning losses, educational experts say. Students can't learn if they are not in school, and a rotating cast of absentee classmates can negatively affect achievement of even students who do not show up, because teachers must slow down and adjust their approach to keep everyone on track. Right? Skipping down. And because teachers are also expected to post out their work online, often nothing more than a skeleton version of an assignment, families incorrectly think that students are keeping up, says Miller. One last piece, and then I want to talk a little bit about this. So, across the country, students are staying home when sick, not only with COVID-19, but also with more routine colds and viruses. And more students are struggling with their mental health. One reason for the increased absenteeism in Mason, Ohio, an affluent suburb of Cincinnati, said Tracy Carson, a district spokeswoman. Because many parents can work remotely, their children can also stay home. And for Ashley Cooper, 31, of San Marcos, Texas, the pandemic fractured her trust in an education system that she said left her daughter to learn online with little support and then expected her to perform on grade level upon her return. Her daughter, who fell behind in math, has struggled with anxiety ever since. And it kind of goes on. There's a lot more that's happening in this article, but I just wanted to talk through some of those things because I think that there's and I've brought this up before about the attention of learning loss, right? And this kind of this whole idea that everyone's falling behind. I have and remain. Good morning, Amy. How are you? I have and remain deeply. Or let me put it. I think that narrative of falling behind is a deeply problematic narrative, right? And that one parent says it and gets at why I think that right here, right? She says this, right? She fractured her trust in education system that left her daughter to leave online with little support and then expected her to perform on grade level upon her return. So there's three aspects of it. So left her daughter to learn online. Okay, that is something that, that was a real problem, right? That was a real problem because that we went from a school that was in person to having to do stuff online, and there was all sorts of clunks and kinks in how to do this stuff. There was no preparation. People had to learn as they were going. Teachers had to learn, so did students, and that's definitely going to have an impact, right? So I'm not even questioning that. The second part, with little support. So as anybody who has kids know, or as anybody who's been reading about this stuff knows, is that what happened in that shift online was that you basically kept classroom structure and moved it in an online environment. In other words, if I was a teacher who had 30 students in my classroom, I was expected to be a teacher with 30 students online. And it was like a one-to-one shift, right? But the fact of the matter is that teacher had not learned how to do online schooling. There was no recognition that there is going to be significant problems with following up with students and everything like this, and people who are capable of handling handling all the kind of like technological issues that are here, right? It got a little bit better as time goes on, but not much, right? And why? Right? Again, and I remember talking about this at the time. It's like, you have a pandemic. That is a real thing in the world. And then in order to keep people safe, right, we shut down. I don't know if there really was any other legitimate option at that time, other than like, oh, you get it, you die, right? That was what the right wing wanted, right? Too bad for you, suck it up. Or in the words of my university president, right? You got to have some grit and fortitude. Get back in there, suck up that virus. Grit and fortitude is what he used. Anyways, with that little support. So the question was, there's going to be an increased need in the midst of this pandemic. And that increased need was not filled. And there were people at the time who pointed this out. There were people at the time who said this. But the resistance by state governments and the federal government at the time was to fund those needs. In other words, if you know schools are going to need more tech help, guess what? You need to hire more people. If in order to make sure that students are kind of getting the kind of one-to-one kind of connections that they would normally get in in-person class, then guess what? You're going to need more teaching assistants. But none of that happened. I'm sure in the rich school districts that happened. Some of them at least. But none of that happened. Because we don't know how to do structure. We don't know how to do systems. We don't think about how to do like big things when it requires government investment. And matter of fact, good chunk of the American populace is against doing that thing because we've been taught, as I said at the beginning of the show, we've been taught to embrace this neoliberal idea that everyone's on their own and the government is bad and all that other kind of stuff. Right? So that's the second part. The third link in this problem is that said, okay, her daughter had to learn online, didn't get much support, and then here's the key. The school system expected her to perform on grade level upon her return. And then her daughter fell behind in math. I remember saying this early on. I said, this is a problematic narrative, right? Whoever thought that you're just going to kind of go back to normal? And this was the problem in this country, right? The problem in this country is that we're just going to go back to normal. We just got to rush back to normal. Even though so many of us are experiencing and still feeling the lingering effects of the trauma of that moment. Of feeling social connections destroyed, of feeling like our place in the world uprooted. The anxiety of a pandemic that you didn't know whether or not you were going to die from it, right? I mean, come on. That's a real thing in the world. And to pretend that that is not going to impact the specific things that we're learning or how we're learning or what we're doing, that is just insane to me. I remember having this discussion multiple times, and arguments I've had with people about this. Like, we're saying, like, look, they're like, well, they're learning loss. I'm like, no. They're learning stuff. It's just not stuff that's measured on these standardized freaking tests. Is like our kids who've gone through this right now, who've gone through this pandemic, are having a life experience that most of us have never had as a kid. They've learned about living in a pandemic. They've grown up with that. And that is going to affect their worldview and how they make their way through the world. That is a huge learning curve. And I challenge anybody to suggest that kids did not learn stuff from that pandemic. The only issue is what are we measuring as learning? And we have, and again, this is Joe Lieberman, that wing of the Democratic Party is one of the primary reasons why we're here. George W. Bush and the No Child Left Behind, the strong push for the standardized testing, the Obama administration's idea that we're just going to count everything and assess everything. This has been generations now of a shift away from the kind of education that addresses the whole person to turning them into balance sheets of measuring these TikToks. I don't mean the platform. These little tick boxes, I should say. This is what like 10th grade level means. This is what this level, they have to do these particular things with this. And there is no flexibility in that structure. So what we did to our kids, and this is where we as a country, I believe, are accountable for this and owe some of the responsibility for the kind of crisis our kids are facing. The ongoing mental health issues and stuff like that. Because we as a society, even though, I mean, look, I personally was trying to work against this, but as a society, we told our kids to go back to normal and try to stuff them into boxes that were not adjusted because of the pandemic. The narrative of getting back to normal dominated everything. We forced them back into a system that wasn't working for them to begin with. The standardized retesting regimes have done so much damage to our schools. For what? For who? The promise of the No Child Left Behind at the beginning, right? At the very beginning. The promise is that, look, we need to do a kind of an assessment of what's actually happening in our schools and making sure that, again, like the name says, no child is left behind. And there were great people who got aboard on those task force, people from all over the political spectrum, people who are invested in education. Because they said, yeah, we need to do this. I don't care if it's a Republican president or Democrat president, we're going to do this, right? And then after about a year on that task force, I can't believe I'm forgetting her name, Diane. It'll come to me. Who's like done all this stuff, did a whole expose about her time on this task force, and is one of the leading voices against these standardized testing regimes and stuff like this. Anyways, they go down there, and after a year, they find like, oh, wait a minute. We're doing this kind of assessment. We're doing these test scores to figure out kind of where, where people are. We're trying to have this standard measurement so that we can make sure that resources get to where they need to be, right? And then they were quickly said, oh no, because you had all these voucher people, right, that were kind of in on this, that were in that same regime. You had all these privatization of education people that were in there, these anti-public school people, these right-wing Christian nationalist people who want to kind of take public dollars to put it in their Christian schools, right? All that stuff. They were the ones who were working the policy thing. So instead of saying, hey, look, the promise was you have these kind of like, say, these schools in these poor districts, right? Whether it's kind of like in Philadelphia, right? The Philadelphia, city schools, or whether you're having it in some like, some schools up like in Pottsville or something like this, or Wilkes-Barre, things like this, in areas that were also kind of like underserved and they were kind of in more rural areas. And we say, look, these kids are not getting the kind of support that they need. So we're gonna make sure that funding gets to them. So we hire the appropriate amount of people. We fix their schools so it's not snowing in there in the winter. I mean, I always remember hearing those stories about in Reading School District, right? Literally snowing inside the school building during the school year because there was no money to fix the schools, right? So no child left behind. Oh man, we need to fix that school. So they actually have a safe learning environment, right? That's not what happened. What they did is they used that data that they got from those testing regimes. They used that data as a way to punish those schools and put them on warning so that they could shut them down. And guess what? Guess who would take them over? The charter school people, the Christian school people, the for-profit education people. Because if you read about what the school privatization gurus do, right? Like for the Bradley Foundation, for example, out of Milwaukee, we've talked about them multiple times in the show. The Bradley Foundation, for example, had a whole blueprint for this. And one of the things that, look, these people that want to privatize our schools, these right-wing folks, they're not dummies. They've got an education agenda, but they also got a profit agenda. And what they knew is some of the most valuable real estate that was out there were these schools. And they would do this crazy little thing. If you read some of the history of this, it's so infuriating. You have No Child Left Behind would put these schools, these quote unquote failing schools, again, the failing language, the failing rhetoric, these failing schools on notice. Schools that are already in completely strapped districts, at overflowing classrooms, too many kids, don't even have enough desks for the kids, have outdated materials if they had them at all, snowing in the buildings, and they would say, "You're failing. It's on you. You better get those test scores up or we're going to shut you down." Can you imagine being in that situation? You're like, I can't, there's not clean running water in the building, and you're telling me that it's my fault, right? But that's what they did, is blame the teachers, right? You blame the teachers, you blame the teachers unions, you blame all that kind of stuff, and you say that they are at fault. And then you shut the school down, and now you have a big school building. And guess what happened? You have these great little charter schools that would get up, and they do this great thing. There'd be a for-profit company, right, that would buy the building, right? Sometimes they do it a nonprofit one, right? But they'd have a separate nonprofit corporation that would run the school. So the nonprofit corporation would have to rent the space from the for-profit company, right? And the for-profit company could make money off the nonprofit. And what's great about it for them, the nonprofit doesn't even need to raise funds because they've passed new charter legislation that takes money from the public schools and sends it to the charters first. The charters get their money before the public school gets their money. Why? Well, the charter school has to pay the corporation, right, that they're renting from. In some of the charter things, like what happened to Philadelphia, because that was like Bradley Foundations, that was their kind of like their playground for the longest time, right? Then they would set up as either part of that, like their real estate company, or they set up a publishing company, right? And so they set up a publishing company that would produce handouts and worksheets and kind of standardized curriculum for their charter schools, right? And then they would sell them to the nonprofit. Nonprofit would buy from the for-profit publication company for the school-based materials. You see what's happening here? It's a grift. And look, there are some really good charter schools out there that didn't do what I just described at all. That became a charter for the reasons the charters are supposed to be out there. To do innovative, different stuff. To serve underserved populations and so on. And the other key thing about the charter schools, right, is they had it written into the kind of the ways that the laws work, right? Is that the charter schools, they didn't have to accept everybody. So guess who they refused to bring in? People with disabilities, people with learning problems, poor people. Some cases, not all cases, but in particular learning disabilities, poor academic or performance, that kind of stuff, learning problems. Why? Well, because those people are not going to perform well on tests. And if you don't perform well on tests, then you're not going to be able to kind of, get your PR wing out there and basically say, look how great we do. So there's no requirements to actually serve the populations. They can pick and choose who they want. They're choosing the students they want. That is not a public school anymore. They call it a public charter. It is not a public school anymore. It is a selected school. And it's not to increase learning. It's for we're going to select these students to create our PR so we can market our grift. Just do any even cursory reading about the history of, not even the history, like last several years of the cyber charters in Pennsylvania. It's like sickening what a grift that was. Yet where is the learning loss crisis for all that shit? So this is I point out this stuff because look, there is a real problem, right? I do think there's real impacts what COVID has had on our schools. But I will also say that we, as a concerned society, or people, have had very little time or space to actually think how we grapple with it. I mean, look, this is the way the society is meant to get us to do, right? Everything has to be crisis acting. I shouldn't use those words because I don't mean like the way that they talk about other right. I mean, everything has to be a response to a crisis. That we never have time to actually deliberate and talk about what's going to be best. That we just have to just respond to these endless demands by experts and managers and bosses and things like this to just go, 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 go. And we're supposed to kind of fix it with what's limited time and resources that we have. This is not a way to run a society. This is the kind of like anti-society trajectory that we're on. And we've been on this for a while. But you take from the Baltimore Bridge collapse to what's happening in this absenteeism, the way that we even talk about it, it's the same freaking structural failure, right? It's the same one. And meanwhile, most of us are freaking exhausted. So imagine just think for a second. Just imagine being in a society where we had a moment to pause and say, "Holy crap. We're going through and still dealing with the lingering effects of a pandemic that killed over 1 million people in this country. 1 million people. Whoa. That's like, whoa. 1 million people, more than 1 million people, dead. People lost family members, friends. People lost jobs, careers, trajectories in their lives. How do we make sure that we take care of each other as we kind of figure out how to deal with the effects of that? What's going to be necessary in our society to make sure that everyone's got the resources they need to deal with that? We know that online learning and the way that it happened and things like this, we know that's, obviously these kids, obviously these kids are not going to be, are going to be in a different place than if they had just gone through the system as it had been before. So where are they at now? So when we have kids that are entering 3rd grade, kids that are entering 9th grade, kids that are entering college, like where are they going to be at, right? And how do we think about our classes and our curriculum in such a way that is going to meet them where they're at? I know we got all these standardized tests and all this kind of stuff that we're supposed to do over here, but man, it's just ridiculous. It's measuring the wrong stuff. Matter of fact, we had that time to pause and think about the impact. We probably could have looked at those standardized tests and say, if we give these standardized tests to students, it's just going to show everybody failing. It's going to show everything on a downward trajectory. And that could actually compound the problem. Because now not only are they kind of feeling like, oh God, like I don't know this, or I feel like I'm behind. Now they're going to be told that they're failing, that they're behind, that they have learning loss. The fact is they have not lost learning. They did learn. They learned a lot. They just didn't learn what's measured on standardized tests. And we as a society decided that we didn't care. that we're going to measure them from the standardized test because we already have them, and there's lots of money being made off those standardized tests. And lots of politicians are running on these standardized tests. And we can use our kids' learning loss as a political weapon against our opponents. It's sickening, really, when you think about it. You know, for the longest time is like, you know, there's been, you see this periodically and things like this, but especially the stuff that I'm much more interested in these days, especially in thinking about in the wake of, you know, climate crisis and all this stuff like this, is needing to make a shift to kind of like, you know, a care-based society, right? From what we have now, whatever the hell you want to call it now. One in which starts with people and then asks the question, what do people need? And we build stuff around that. Now it starts with profits, and people be damned. We think about the questions that we would ask. The first questions that we asked were, how do we make sure people are taken care of? If you need evidence to say that we don't do that, well, you remember how many nursing home deaths there were? How many people died in nursing homes? Where's the care there? If we wanted so badly to get our kids and our students back in classes, in person, well, we had a pathway, right? We had guidelines that say you need 6 feet in between individuals, masked individuals in good ventilation, right? Okay. If that's what we need to make sure that we have in-person schooling, then let's do that. But you quickly find out that, well, okay, we can't do it in our existing classroom. But guess what? There are tons of empty warehouses, tons of empty buildings that are not being used in the middle of the pandemic that could have been used to make sure that that happened. If that was such a priority, we could have done that. But that was never an option. Instead, we took the recommendations, right? We took the kind of, here's what you need to do in order to open back up. You have the 6 feet, 6 feet distance. Instead of that, you had counties, you had localities, and I said, we're just going to reinterpret the guidelines. We're not going to do the 6 feet, we're going to do 2. Because we think we can squeeze kids in that way, right? That is like the ass backwards way. This is what keeps people safe. You say, well, yeah, but that's not going to work for us, so we're going to make people unsafe and pretend that they're safe, right? No, I don't know. Anyways, I went way deeper than I wanted to, but it's just one of these things that's really troubling to me, and it's just a window into the way that we do things as a society, right? Now, I mentioned this stuff up front, and then I think I'm just going to have get somebody on the show. I mean, I recognize it. Look, and I'm sorry again. There's no show this past Monday. It has been something. I'm telling you, my work has just been taking everything from me of late. I'm exhausted. And rather than burn my candle at whatever every end possible, and forcing myself to do the show on Monday, I just like, okay, look, I'm just going to wait till I get to the place where I can have people on and we're actually be thinking about it, and not feel like, okay, now I've just put myself back for another week in my job. So, but the stuff that's happening in higher education, if you remember, I think a few weeks back, I think it was probably before we left, I took a break, that we went on vacation. My family and I went on vacation. Before then, that there was a series of articles that came out about why the kind of the right wing, particularly the kind of the Trump associated crew, is so keen on targeting higher education, right? And they were looking at policies and what was going on in Florida, looking at it, and it's always, and this has been an ongoing issue. I totally recognize that, but they were saying this is going to be something that we're going to see in the election, and so in the ramp up for that, to see so many attacks on, academic freedom, about education, like diverse education, so on here. Like I said, to run that down, University of Florida, they kind of, they brought what's his name, Christopher Rufo down there, right, to say, okay, we're gonna help consult on setting up a kind of like classical education. Let's do the all white guy thing. We're gonna do, and again, it's just another way of cloaking the kind of Christian nationalist agenda. We're gonna go down there. We're gonna kind of take over this one college in the university system, and then now at the University of Florida, we're gonna set up this, center, well-funded center, right, in order to promote these kind of ideas, the things that you would find at Hillsdale College and things like this. Governor DeSantis famously said, this is going to make this into the Hillsdale of the South, right? So they set up this center, and then some bunch of faculty just not so keen about it, right? And finding out that center was being able to kind of construct curriculum, but all sorts like this that could circumvent the entire way that you kind of like approve curriculum and everything like this. And because some faculty members, according to the administration, weren't like all gung-ho and on board, now they're being investigated because they interfered with the smooth workings and the launch of this new stuff, right? So you've got that there. Boston University, you have students out strike. There's strikes going on all over the place in higher education right now. Boston University administration says, hey, faculty members, you're a little bummed out that your grad students are out on strike, or maybe even support those on strike, but you're worried that you might have to take us on the work. Or what shall we do with those discussion sections, right? Just trying to be helpful, the administration says, hey, why don't you turn that over to AI? And show them how to do it, encourage them how to do this, to run it through AI, respond to students using AI, right? So there's another. Indiana law require professors to promote intellectual diversity in the classroom or face kind of disciplinary actions or removal, right? Looking at the elimination of tenure, right? That would protection of the kind of like, ironically, protection of academic freedom, protecting of freedom of speech, protecting of areas of inquiry, right? Why? Because there are some conservative students who feel their foo-foos are hurt because their election denialism and their kind of fantasy politics and fantasy ways of thinking about the world are not entertained. That they don't understand why that, or they feel oppressed because their fascist ideas aren't welcomed in the classroom. Or the belief that white Christians should dominate the world is not taken as seriously as a diverse democracy, right? I mean, things like that. This is a way to run over intellectual freedom and exchange of ideas. It's crazy. That's the Indiana law. And University of Kentucky president says, you know what? Enough of this faculty having a Senate where they're kind of deciding on policies and programs at the university. Enough of that. We're just going to get rid of that. Why? Because they stand in our way. They talk too much. They want to do things about kind of like that's academically has some integrity to it. We just need them to do what we want. So we're just going to disband the faculty senate, and we're going to say the board of trustees. They're going to make the decisions. Why? Because they run things more like a corporation. Faculty be damned. All that this week. So, one thing I wanted to talk more about, and I did not, but this is really cool. I'm just looking at the time here, and I'm just going to have to jet soon. So Bucks County, for example, is now, it's a great article in Bucks County Beacon by Cyril Michaleko. I'll read you the first opening paragraphs for it. Do check out the article. It says, Bucks County government announced Monday it is willing to fight to save the planet. It filed a lawsuit to hold accountable the, quote, titans of the fossil fuel industry, BP, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, ExxonMobil, Phillips 66, Shell, and API, for intentionally deceiving the public for decades about the product's role in accelerating the climate crisis, which has caused so much destruction in its wake. Quote, by taking big oil companies to court for their climate lies, Bucks County joins a growing wave of communities that are demanding accountability and taking action to make polluters pay for these crises, make polluters pay for the crisis these companies knowingly fueled and lied about for decades, unquote, said Richard Wiles, president of the Center for Climate Integrity. Quote, more than 1 in 4 people in the U.S. now live in a community suing major fossil fuel companies to make them pay for their climate deception. Bucks County is the first Pennsylvania government to file a climate accountability lawsuit against big oil companies but it likely won't be the last, unquote. This is fantastic stuff. And why? So the lawsuit seeks to shift the financial burden from taxpayers who suffer from climate-related damages and destruction to the companies responsible for creating this climate crisis. In fact, the Center for Climate Integrity released a report last year revealing that Pennsylvania faces more than $15 billion in climate adaptation costs by 2040, while Bucks County municipalities would likely need to spend almost $1 billion in that time to adapt to infrastructure to make it climate resilient. Right? It said, quote, in recent years, we have experienced unprecedented weather events here in Bucks County that have repeatedly put residents and their first responders in harm's way, damaged public and private property, and placed undue strain on our infrastructure, unquote, said Commissioner Chair Diane Ellis Marseglia. Quote, we're already seeing the human and financial tolls of climate change beginning to mount, and if oil companies' own data is to be believed, the trend will continue. Right? This is a great move. I'm so psyched to see this, right? This is the kind of action we have. In the absence of our government, our federal government, to really take decisive action, this is where we got to have the action. This is great things. I'm so glad to see that. Good on Bucks County for putting that lawsuit forward. Final thing, and everything we talked about today on this show is connected to this last item, right? We've got an election coming up. Right. The primary election here in Bucks County is on April 23rd. You got to be kidding me. I didn't put this in here. Hold on a second. Is on April 23rd. Right. The last day to register to vote is April 8th. Hold on a minute. Okay, here we go. Last day to register to vote is April 8th, 2024, right? That is like just about a week over. It's easy to remember this year because it's the day of the eclipse, right? Eclipse day is the last day to register to vote. So if you start hearing there's eclipse going on that day, you're like, oh crap, this is the last day I have registered to vote if you're not registered already. If the eclipse is hard to remember it's my dad's birthday. So either one. Either if you hear it's my dad's birthday or if you hear the eclipse is here, that's your deadline. Okay? Register to vote. Right? And that is true whether you're going to vote in person or if you're going to vote by mail. Okay? So make sure you do this. The last day to hand in, oh God, where is this? It's supposed to be right here. Sorry. I had this saved and I somehow kind of messed up here. In person Monday. I think the last day that you can sign up to get one more time. Hold on. Oh my God, I'm really messing this up, aren't I? Okay. Last day. Well, just know that for now. Okay, I'm pretty sure it's the 16th is the last day that you could request an absentee ballot. But you have to be registered by the 8th, right? You have to be registered by the 8th. So make sure. Right. Today is the 29th, right? That is a little more than a week away, right? On April 8th that you are registered. You can do that online, right? You go pavoterservices.pa.gov, right? You just go right there. That's all you need, right? To vote, right? Go vote. You go www.vote. Wait, here, I'm going to give you the whole thing again. www.vote.pa.gov, right? You go right there, and that's going to give you all the information that you are going to need, right? About when that you need to register. Primary election day is on April 23rd, 2024, right? That's what, when I'm giving you the deadline, April 8th. Oh, here's everything. Great. April 8th is your last day to register to vote so that you can vote in the primary election, right? If you have never voted in a primary election before and you're not registered to vote, you need to register. You need to know that you can only vote for a party. That means if you want to vote in the primary election, that means you have to be registered either as a Democrat or a Republican, because those are the two. That was what the primary is, right? If you are an independent, you cannot vote in the primary election because those are party primaries. They are not general elections. So if you want to vote in that primary, here's you go. Right. The last day as I said, you could request a mail-in or absentee ballot is April 16th. As I said, the general election, that's November 5th, right? You have until October to register to vote. But why not do it now? Do it right now so you're registered to vote for the fall, okay? You can also go to, again, vote.pa.gov, right? And you can see if you're registered. I would encourage everybody to do it, right? I do it every single year. I just want to make sure, right, that something somehow didn't get screwed up, right? Something somehow didn't get messed up. So I'm going to make sure that I've got my polling place there. They got the right information and so on, so I know that I can vote, right? That's your job. Please get registered to vote and get ready to go. All this stuff, right? I mean, again, voting is not the beginning and the end of democracy, right? Voting is a moment in democracy, a very important one, but is a moment in democracy. But those are the folks that make the policy. So that's when we need to get out there and kind of get rid of these crazies that have been dominating our politics for so long. Anyways, everybody, this is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. Thank you for taking some time with me today, and I appreciate everything that everybody's doing. I'm going to kind of have a weekend here. For those of you who celebrate Easter, happy Easter to everyone. I'm going to do a beach cleanup tomorrow, which I'm really excited about. We're going down for the day. We're going to pick up a bunch of trash on the beach. Something kind of, a little something for the earth on tomorrow. And then we have, we'll do Easter and things like this, do a little Easter egg hunt for kids and things like this. But we're going out. So I hope you have a great weekend. If you have an extra day or two for this weekend, may you fully enjoy it. You just know that you deserve it. And thank you, everybody, for everything that you do. And we'll be back. I'll keep you posted. I'll try to be more online. Sorry. Keep posting what's coming up. Until then, everybody. See ya!
Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.